Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. It is around 11:17 a.m. here in New York. Due to outstanding response among Harvard community, we bring to you the part 2 of the Decoding Ancient Temples by Subhashish Acharya. I give mic to chairperson of Harvard in the Alumni Kanchan to take it further.
Thank you so much, Chandan. Hello, everyone. Before proceeding, I would really want to thank and congratulate to Subhashish because your part 1 was super hit and it was like the most asked recording for. And we are looking forward to have the same response for our second part as well. And of course, here to gather as much as information from this whole thing. So without wasting too much of time, I'll just pass on my mic to Subhashish and ask him to start our session today.
Kanchan, am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Let's go. So this is part 2 of Decoding Ancient Temples, and I think one day we'll probably have part 10 very soon. What we want to do is, let me just quickly introduce myself as the PLD 29 batch, and let's go right into the agenda today. And I'm going to take myself off the video so we can focus on the topic. The agenda today is we're going to first recap part 1 and understand some of the elements that we have discovered. The second element that we want to talk about is understanding the real code in the temples. The third piece is kind of taking people through how to decode and some of the elements that are needed to understand how the temples and the codes and what the ancient civilizations actually had. And finally, we'll end this with some applications that we are all developing, something that can help our personal selves, like the authentic self, and sometimes the business as well. So the first thing that matters to all of us is let's test our knowledge a little bit. If you look at this snap of the ceilings of certain temples, they are gorgeous. But instead of looking at the grandeur and the artistry, we may have to understand the purpose first. Because nobody wants to build temples if they don't serve a purpose. Now, the single purpose of all temples is that they want to achieve something, they want to leave a wisdom to subsequent generations, because when you encode information in stone, it stays for millions of years. Well, some don't, but that is because invaders and plunderers will always destroy something. But nevertheless, this is actually what is called the 8-dimensional universe. Now, when we look at the statues, if you look at the construction of these statues, it is exquisite. They're all made in 3D. How they did it, we have no idea yet. But what is constant is the repetition of these statues and the poses, the angles, the geometry, and the temple construction. And from here, we have come to understand these statues or any deity is basically an archetype of a constellation that creates psychological behavior. We will talk about that as well. Like, what is an archetype? An archetype is a collective behavioral pattern that exists in human consciousness. Now, many people may not even, or they may not be able to fathom that this temple basically encodes the 64 codon rings of the human DNA. The ancient civilizations not only knew about the human DNA, they actually knew how to connect the human DNA to the energies of the planets and the constellations that exist. And finally, why build all these structures? Now, this is a psychological and a time clock, and it times things to the second. Now, how they did it is a science that nobody wants to study. It's called archaeoastronomy, which means encoding astronomy in architecture. So let's go to part 2 with the first piece which I talked about, which is the recap. So first of all, disclosures. My models of research are very unconventional. My work is not for any commercialization at all. It's just that I'm more interested in the mysteries of the universe. I like to see evidence and correlate evidence all the time instead of putting an opinion. Sometimes there's always going to be an opinion. But the point is that it's very unconventional. The whole model builds on one piece, that is unification or convergence. So let's go to the most important fact, that why is it so hard to interpret the wisdom of the temples? So let me give you a couple of reasons. The first reason, of course, is one really needs to have good skills understanding astrological archetypes, astronomy, archaeoastronomy, understanding the celestial cycles, planetary cycles, mythology, geometry, etc., etc. Understanding that the ancient civilizations were so advanced, they were extremely advanced. They were so connected to each other, they did not require a language. Language actually comes from the mind, and the ancient civilizations knew how to communicate through telepathy. But more than that, it was not needed. They just knew it. It's a kind of a knowing that we will never understand, particularly in this civilization, because we are not that good enough at all. They knew one thing, and that is how to unite and not to divide. The second piece is that because they were so advanced, we cannot think of the way they led their lives and why they did what they did. And I also finally believe that, of course, red tape and lack of original thinking just exists everywhere. And of course, there's always a powerful force, the Wizards of Oz's or Wizards of Oz and evolutionists who completely changed the timeline again and again and again. So let's go and talk about a couple of details here. This is called a step well by many of the researchers. Well, this is absolutely wrong because they are only looking at the physical. They are not looking at the essence and the applications. They are not looking at the fundamentals of form follows functions. They are looking at the form, but not understanding the function. Once you go a little bit deep inside it, you'll see that the whole structure mimics these cycles of the moon. So what does this structure do? This structure, they used to fill this up with water in the night, and as the moon gets reflected on the water, it basically sends a light signal which kind of moves all around and through this set of steps. You can actually map the entire movement of the moon and the celestial cycles that the moon takes, and you can find out how they can do agriculture. There were multiple things they used to do, measuring time. But the most important piece that matters here is that they were absolutely aligned with the cycles of the universe. And that is where we as a species at this moment of time are so misaligned, because we have lost the power of observation. So when it comes to observation, they used to observe the turtle or the tortoise and understand that the universe has basically created the rest of the ecosystem where they can observe and understand celestial cycles. And that's why our calendars have been tampered with, because the ancient civilizations never had the same calendar that we have today. And I'm going to explain this more as we keep moving. So the fundamental piece is that they used to create these structures and then reflect the sun, moon in the water. And the moon and sun used to follow a certain path along with the stars, and they could measure what is the time of the day right down to the second. And that's why the ancient civilizations were so good. They knew at a particular time, the sun, for example, and this is Angkor Wat temple, they knew exactly that the sun would be there during the solstices. So solstice would mean the pinnacle, and that's why they developed this archaeoastronomy in such a way that the sun will always be at the same place on the same day every year for thousands of centuries. They knew all this, but we didn't. But we made three major discoveries here. The first is the ceilings are the E8 crystal lattice. It basically explains the 8-dimensional universe, which is an octave. What is an octave? An octave is a song. Universe, one verse, one song. So they mapped every bit of the universe, but they did not follow the Newtonian or classical Newtonian mechanics, which is just built on the model of a particle. So we all know that there is a particle and there is a wave. Newtonian mechanics completely eliminates the wave at every piece of the story. The pillars of the temple were the 64 codon rings of our DNA, and it connected to various archetypes and constellations. And then finally, all statues, deities are actually constellations, and they have a certain archetypal property, but they are all subjective. So subjective would mean it exists within us. They are built in an objective manner to invoke the emotions and the subjectivity which is within us. So let's talk about what was in the ceiling and what was the E8 crystal lattice. Just to let you know that the moment you look at the E8 crystal lattice, this won the Mathematics Nobel Prize in 2023. The moment you look at it, you know that they are talking about toroidal physics and hyperdimensional physics and all that stuff. But the most important piece is the temples harnessed energies of the cosmos. And the entire temple structure that was built on the Earth's surface, they harnessed the energies of the universe to create a technology called implosion, which is opposite to what we do today, like explosion. Let's take a look. On the right-hand side is the structure of the atom. On the left is the E8 crystal. E8 crystal is when you look at the universe in 8 dimensions, how does it look like? This is how it looks like. It's a 4-minute video, but we don't really need to see it. But we just need to see the correlation of this exceptional figure that won the Mathematics Nobel Prize. This is why the ceilings were built like this. They were built with absolute mathematical precision. If you take a look at this one, for example, can you even understand, or can we even understand, how did they build this 3-dimensional ceiling? Why would somebody build it? It is not art. It is way beyond that. And that is something we are missing. And that is what we bring in this presentation. So what we did is we took the ceiling and mapped the entire E8 crystal. And as you see, it traces out the exact points of the ceiling. Now, this is a way bigger concept, and all the points basically mimic each and every line on this ceiling. What it shows is the ancient civilizations were way more advanced than any of us. And that was the Buddhist mandala. And if you put these structures into the temple, it fits neatly. We can go across many of the temples in the world, and we will see the same kind of structure being mimicked all over. Now, this is an Indian temple, but this is in Malta, a church in Malta, and they were unaffected by the, world wars. If we put the same structure over here, which is the E8 crystal lattice, it just mimics the same as well. So the question is, what did they master, which we haven't? On the right, you can see one head and 5 figures all coming together. What it basically means is that we know there are 4 elements: fire, water, earth, and air. But there is one last element called the ether. Nobody talks about that element at all, but that is the most important element from which the rest flow. So finally, this is how some of these temples and the structures look like, and it is all built on the 8-dimensional universe. And because it is so, we have no idea what was the reason for building these structures. So let's go to the next piece, which is understanding that the ceilings then led to something even bigger, which is understanding the temple. Some of the temples, specifically the ones that dealt with Tantra, they knew how to program the DNA. There were 64 codon rings, and they knew how to connect the DNA of the human ultimately to the constellation energies. And that's why these temples were built. The problem is, we may know some of these codes, but the process of connecting these energies is what they mastered over time. Take a look at this structure for a second. This structure, you'll see, has a very specific shape. In one of the steps, there is something like a Morse code. What this is the human DNA, which is the adenine, guanine, cytosine, etc., etc. And this is basically the base of all our mandalas. How do we know this? Because the DNA is fractal. This is typically the shape of the DNA spiral. In the DNA spiral, you can see there are 32 base pairs, which is the 32 base codon rings that come together as opposites. The whole structure embeds in itself. So which means that this is the only structure that can be compressed, and you can compress it more and more, but it will have perfect compression. So it is not just a helix. The DNA, that is our codon rings, the whole model fits as one. Now, this is not discussed at all. I don't know why, because very obviously this will lead into a lot of spiritual and questions about the discussion about consciousness that flows everywhere. But these people not only knew how to program it, they left this code, which is there are 3 stop codons and there is a start codon. That is exactly how all DNA programming happens in pharma companies. You will also notice the use of something called implosive or implosive physics. And implosive physics is a model where it creates black holes within itself. Everything converges there is no explosion. This is how they built stellar civilizations and temples all over the world. So finally, let's talk about the last piece, and which is the constellations are basically nothing but the deities. They knew the map of the sky. They understood and mapped every part of the visible universe. And they knew that when the moon and the sun and all the planets move, certain events will always happen to us. And ultimately, it happens to everybody, creating big events in the future. Let's take a quick look at this. This is the Nataraj. Now, if you look on the right, you can actually see the 6-pointed star over here. But really, what they are trying to say is that Shiva in the sky was Orion. Orion, the constellation. And every hand and feet movement explained which particular constellation that would be moving this energy along. Now, what we need to do is we need to understand some of these poses, and some of these poses can be really hilarious and nearly extremely difficult to even, mimic, but many people do that. Congratulations. I wouldn't try. But what happened is all these poses of Shiva have a certain archetypal behavior within the human collective. So they have mapped every behavioral pattern that is created by the subjective energies using this code. Now, how do we decode this? Now, let us say you've got Vishnu over here. We may just say this is Vishnu. But the point is, we just don't know what it signifies. The ancient civilizations were so brilliant that they converged every information into one statue or a deity. So, for example, from Vishnu's navel, you've got a 3-dimensional axis, and now you can find out the left foot is west, which means it is pointing towards something called a descendant where the sun sets. And it is exactly telling us that ultimately this particular deity, that is Vishnu, that is an archetypal behavior which is within us, all these can be understood by understanding which stars, which constellations are making this energy flow. Now, this is a little complex because one needs to decode all this. So the question is, how can we decode all this information? Well, some of this information is pretty much public. For example, you see in India, there's a lot of asterism. So which means they talk about a lot of stars like Ashwini, Bharani, Kritika. What they did is that they created a certain archetype of that particular star. So for example, let's take the third point, which is Kritika. The symbol is that of a knife or a spear. So what does it mean? That Kritika is basically a cutter. It's a knife. So it can cut things. So if an energy is flowing, it can cut that energy. So similarly, a horse's head, those are kind of the archetypal pieces by which they have been able to identify a property that is subjective with an objective, which is the horse's head. Which means that the objective symbols ultimately is the code to show us what is the subjective and emotional quality. So let's go to some of these elements. That is, what is the process of decoding this wisdom? And what is this wisdom, by the way? Why use it? Can we build applications for business and our personal lives? But I think we have to ask a major question, and that is, what does it lead to? Why would they take the effort to build temples? Why were these temples destroyed? Why were libraries destroyed? Why can't we even decode this wisdom? And finally, of course, we'll talk about some of the applications in personal life and business, which we call as subjective decision intelligence. But let's look at some of these elements right now. So the first question that we have to ask is, why this wisdom? Why would they take the effort? What is it? What is the biggest reason that all invaders, like the monarchies and from the Middle East, why would they destroy temples all over the world and then subjugate people? So let's take a look at that by taking a look at some of the ancient temples of the world. This is the Somnath temple. Now, nobody really knows when this temple was built, and we can talk about that later. But this was not the original structure. This is the structure which was found in 1869. Imagine and take a look at this temple completely destroyed. Now, this is a massive temple. Again, as I said, nobody knows really when this was really constructed, but we can at least say that this temple was attacked probably 200 to 300 times. Why would a temple be attacked so many times over the centuries? Let's take a closer look at some of these elements that were found within the temple, because the entire temple was kind of destroyed. On the right, you can see some of these stones that have been carved. They are extremely strong stones like granite. First of all, how do you carve granite? That's a question number one. The question number two is there were no stones found near the temple. Like all temples, the stones as if like appeared from nowhere. How did they do it? And these were so heavy. So which means we probably have to ask several of these questions that we can't date the construction period, and we'll explain why. All these statues were molded to the same stone and carved in 3D, but the hands were extruded outside. How could you even develop the technology of building a 3D statue from a single block of stone? But the biggest being, how do you stack them? How do you put them together? They are so heavy, 2 tons each. So to answer this or these questions, we need to go into understanding some of these elements. We will never know how the temple or when the temple was created, because we cannot date stone, because they are not changing the properties of the stone. There's no organic matter. It is just a carving. So there's just no way we can understand when these temples were built. But if we look at some of these elements, and it's quite shocking, the Somnath temple is not mentioned in Sanskrit texts of Hinduism. So that is itself a big sign. Like, we don't know. This is beyond, time that we even remember in our history books. Then finally, if you see the second piece, which is nobody knows, and this is real evidence that people have said that, okay, in the Mahabharata, the temple was not known because nobody has any idea. So now that cannot happen, that the texts don't really talk about when the temple was built, but they do talk about the location. That's it. Now, this is where it creates a lot of problems because there are scholars who have looked at the different texts and they have said it's probably like millions of years. And this is exactly something we may need to look at, because there was a purpose of this temple and we don't know when this has been created. That means humanity existed across millions of years. And that is something that evolutionists don't really like. Take a look at this particular statue. If you look at this, this is one stone and the entire thing is engraved. Now this statue, of course, fell down somewhere and you can see the hands are broken. It is so heavy that you have to put it in a concrete block. Now the question that comes to our mind again is, how did they build it into one stone? It requires an absolutely different effort to carve an entire 3D statue from an entire block of stone. How did they do it? And most people don't have an answer. And that's why we will never have these answers until we look deeply. So one of the things that I have to say is the temple was deconstructed and a lot of money was definitely spent. I think it was a wise investment because these temples now can rake in millions of dollars and of tourism and gold and silver. But I would still say that we may have built or rebuilt some of these temple elements, but we may, I believe that the wisdom and the essence of these ancient temples is wiped out. We don't know why they built these temples, but we may probably have a little bit of conjecture, which is the reason we are having this presentation. So a couple of questions that still remains unanswered. When these temples were originally built in ancient times, they really did not have any gold, silver, diamonds, etc. I'm talking about, thousands of years or millions of years when these temples were built. Now, if they had it, the looters would loot and run. Yes, there was a lot of gold and silver probably in the 17th or 18th century, but you would just loot the temple and then run. Why would you stay there and destroy the temple? Now, to destroy the temples is a massive work, and it was spanning for centuries. There were no guns at that moment of time, no cannons, etc., to just blast things out. I mean, there were some, but the invaders wouldn't be carrying heavy equipment from far-flung places. So what I'm saying is that something doesn't add up. Just saying the invaders just wanted the money. Well, they didn't just want the money. They destroyed the temples for a reason. Something doesn't add up over here. So let's look at what are the different properties of these ancient temples. Now, if you look at the temples, they had absolute mathematical precision that even today's computers cannot have. How did they have it? But they had it. They had brilliant astronomical precision as well. So which also means that not only was it mathematically precise, it was also astronomically precise. It was astrologically precise as well, because it was dealing with these subjective energies. The whole temple is like a 3D spatialization, which created sounds and different harmonics. The mantras basically have certain harmonics, and if one can actually use them the right way, one's body is going to vibrate with the constellations and the archetypes. So that was the entire code to basically connect the human DNA to the temple archetypes and finally to these celestial energies. But we do not know how even these mantras work because just saying them doesn't work. There is a quantum physical aspect to it, but the code does exist. We should never forget the artistic and the precision of the skills that they have or had, the planning precision as well. Did they start from the top? Did they start from the side? How could they do it is baffling itself. So the technology itself was baffling. Now let me show you a plan, a top view of a temple. And over here, you can clearly see that there is a geometry which is absolutely brilliant because it is built on beauty. It is built on symmetry. Why would you build something based on symmetry? It is not about just looking good. It is all about certain quantum physical properties that we are going to talk about a little later. The second would be building these very fine structures. And every pillar, for example, of a temple has a certain structure. The information needs to be understood at all layers. But finally, at least we can ask the question, why would you have animal symbolism like the elephants and horses, etc.? Well, the elephants and the horses are nothing but the astrological zodiac. Why do people use animals for zodiacal qualities? Because an animal doesn't change behavior. An elephant will have a certain property of an elephant. A horse would be a horse. So they have their essence and their subjective and objective behavior very clearly. And what they said is that to understand the archetypal qualities of a zodiac, you just need to observe the qualities of the animal behavior. That is how they put the code in these temples. The entire temple was actually built on the precision of the human body. Yes, the human body. The human body had the properties that we are not aware of, but they knew how it was constructed. And that's the reason they could build some of these structures. But what were the structures doing? There has to be a reason. Take a look at the Borobudur temple over here. It is massive. Why would this shape exist? Why would they build it? Forget about how. But what is the message? We don't know. And that is exactly why we need to decode all this. Until we understand all the layers of astronomy, archaeology, architecture, technology, the archetypes, we will not know. Take a look at the pyramids over here. If you look at the pyramids, you will see that the collection of this particular pyramid is the exact same measurement as that of the Swan constellation. The Swan constellation exists and has existed, nobody knows how long, for billions of years. It has a certain quality to it. What they have done is they have taken these points and mimicked the entire constellation. And ultimately, there were perfect angles between these pyramids. Why would they even do that? Well, they did it not because they wanted to mimic the points of the zodiac. They knew that the energies actually flow from the stars. Why would somebody even, this is the Kailash temple. This is built from one mountain, one rock. Why would, or how would, I'm forgetting even the biggest question, and that is how would they build it? The question that we have to ask is, why would they build it? Because if you go into the temple, and you can see the pictures on the right, you'll clearly see the repetition of the same kind of deities everywhere. Now, why would you have the male, the Shiva, and then Parvati on the right, for example, of the picture, of course? Because Orion, that is Shiva, and Parvati, Pleiades, they all go hand in hand. They always travel together in the sky. And they knew how these celestial energies work. It is not just an archetypal property or an astronomical property. It is also a quantum physical property that we will discuss a little later. This is the Stonehenge. Imagine the Stonehenge completely destroyed. But if you really look at this picture, for example, the entire Stonehenge was built on astrological and astronomical considerations. So what is the reason of its existence? To understand this, let us go ahead and take a look. What we are not aware, and the ancients understood this, that the entire earth can actually be divided into certain energy vertices or energy vortex. And these vortex or vertices, or vortexes, whatever be the pronunciation, they existed on all parts of the globe, and one could harness quantum energies to create black holes. So let's talk about how they understood the Earth grid with this wisdom. So let's take a look at how the planets actually dance around Earth, for example, or around celestial bodies, creating these vortexes all over the world. So this particular video basically shows how different planets, they dance around each other, creating absolutely mathematical shapes that keep on repeating and repeating and repeating. So for example, this could be Mars, Venus, it could be Saturn, Jupiter. As we keep on going, these planets, they actually trace out something in the sky, and the exact same pattern seems to be creating these vortexes all over the world. So what happens in the cosmos is ultimately reflected as energy vortexes all over the world on the earth plane. So you can now divide the entire earth in terms of these different mathematical geometries called the Platonic solids. And the Platonic solids, I think there are about 8 of them. They all are fractal to each other, which means each embeds into each other. So long story short, what matters is that they knew how these energies flow all over the earth, and they created these structures to harness it. So now I want to share with you an 8-minute video which explains how the ancient civilizations knew how to mimic structure with latitude and longitude. Let's take a look.
The pyramids, an unsolved mystery until now. Prevailing methodologies being used to explain them.
Let me increase the volume a little bit. I think there's a little bit of somebody's not on mute. Can you please go on mute?
Pyramids, an unsolved mystery until now. Prevailing methodologies being used to explain them. are inadequate. Our search for answers has been centered around the most simplistic of questions. Who built them? When? How? And why? The few answers we do have, we most generally thought up ourselves, with little regard for facts, but no real harm done, except that someone is going to have to rewrite a few thousand history books. Questions? Why are they exactly where they are and designed the way they are? Ask these questions and answers begin to flow. In order to read the pyramids, we must make an adjustment in our thinking. Once made, we achieve the fine-tuning necessary for the decoding process. That adjustment is our Greenwich prime meridian of 360 degrees longitude. That's our prime meridian, not theirs. Theirs was very clearly indicated by the Great Pyramid, some 31 degrees, 8 minutes, and 0.8 seconds to the east of Greenwich. This, of course, means that when reckoning the longitudes of their global matrix array, we must correct them to Giza. As for latitudes, they use the very same equator that we use. This global array that I referred to involves far more than just pyramids. For example, there were great geometric forms, which were built up with nothing more than dirt, such as the Great Octagon at Newark, Ohio. Great earth circles, such as the fort, about a mile to the southeast of the Octagon. Germany's Golo circle near Bonn. And some circles were even built upward in the shape of hemispheres, such as Mexico's Quiquilco pyramid. That's what we call it anyway. The Aztecs called it Juliaco, and since they named it long before we did, that's the name I'll use for it. Finally, the best known of all prehistoric circles, England's Stonehenge. Such ancient monuments mean. These artifacts can be read almost as easily as one reads a newspaper, only the writing is different. We are a purely literary culture. We live, think, and work by alphabets. The geomathematics of this ancient pyramid matrix system was arranged around the language of mathematics. It's only been our reluctance to admit to ourselves that ancient men knew mathematics that has ensured the silence of their monuments for so very long. Deciding to admit it to myself one day and following through with it, these monuments began to speak. British archaeologists have verified that before Stonehenge fell into ruins, it comprised an outer circle of 60 stones, 30 lintels held aloft by 30 supporting stones. The inner display, in the shape of a horseshoe, had 5 lintels held aloft by 10 stones, 15. Let's take these one at a time. What do the 60 stones of the perimeter have to say? They are arranged in a perfect 360-degree circle. Builders reckon circles to have 360 degrees of arc like we do. Remember what I said about admitting that maybe they did? It's as easy as that. A 360-degree circle of 60 stones presents a simple mathematical equation. 60 times 360 is 21,600. Now, why did they wish to convey such a number? Did they? Or is this just idle speculation? They did. As neatly hidden behind this number of 21,600 are three other numbers, 51, 10, and 42.352941. And seen as 51 degrees, 10 minutes, and 42.35 seconds of latitude. We find that this is the dead center position of Stonehenge on our modern maps. Examine what is shown. Count the numbers shown and multiply. And Stonehenge, in absolute silence, explains to anyone precisely where it is. With this discovery now affirmed, we know that they used our present-day 360-degree system when working with circles. Another well-known system used today is the base 10 system. 10 cents is a dime, 10 dimes is a dollar, and so on. They also have a base 10 system. All we have to do is ask, but we must use their language to ask such questions, or we get no answers. Stonehenge has already shown us this number 21,600 in its actual latitude north of the equator. A single number which encodes 51 degrees, 10 minutes, 42.35 seconds. Let's call 21,600 its grid latitude. Now, if they wish to explain a base 10 system to us, all they'd have to have done is to build other circles at grid latitudes or longitudes of 2,160 or 216,000. Stonework at Stonehenge is what archaeologists call the Phase 3 construction. It dates to 1,750 years before Christ. The first phase, dating 1,000 years earlier, was a simple circular earthworks with a diameter of roughly 228 feet. It looks rather blank without the stones, doesn't it? Yet even this construction was important because the ancients built analogs to it everywhere. At least two of them right here in North America, at Newark, Ohio. Almost a carbon copy, isn't it? Except this one has a diameter of 1,056 feet, 1/5 of a mile. Its original name lost in time, we call it a fort, built by the Hopewell Indians. But that defies logic. Indians never built forts, they attacked them. Obtain a U.S. Geological Survey map for Newark, lay out a grid, and anyone can find that the fort centers itself at precisely 40 degrees, 02 minutes, and 27.00 seconds north latitude. And these figures multiply to exactly 2,160, which is 1/10 of the 21,600 grid latitude of Stonehenge.
So I believe that the voice and the video was a little old, but let's proceed with what we have. I didn't realize that it would have so much of problems in the sound, but apologies on that. But we can go into the details of the video, but what matters for all of us is one thing, and that is they were harnessing a vortex energy. They were creating what is called a black hole based on a physics called implosion. Now, if you look at the physics that we follow, it is all about burning things, destroying things, exploding things, right? So we have a nuclear bomb which explodes. We have a gas engine that explodes the gas, and that creates movement. They never did all this. They followed an absolutely different physics called implosion physics, and they realized that they harnessed consciousness and not realize, but they harness consciousness and astrological and alchemical energies to create the technology that we cannot even fathom. Let's take a quick look how these energies work. For example, is there free energy somewhere? How did they harness energy from the Earth's grid? So this is a quick video which gives a kind of an example of a vortex energy and how they harnessed, or how all temples are basically harnessing energy from the ether. Remember those 5 elements? Air, water, fire, earth. Those are the 4 energies. But then what makes it happen is the 5th energy. That's why we have 5 fingers. It shows exactly that to make a fist, you definitely need the thumb. So which means it's the ether that actually creates everything. So how did they acquire this vortex energy? And this is a 2-minute video, and it's an experiment.
So check out this video where a man attaches a copper wire and flies a drone up to about 115 meters and shows off the ether in action.
I'm gonna stop at 115 and hold steady. All right. It didn't blow up yet. Oh, by the way, meet the aerial film crew. I just thought this was a cool shot. Yeah, I'm getting shocked right now. This time I just used the electroscope as a quick voltage check. Now that's a few thousand volts right there. All right, let's see if there's enough current to make this Franklin bell work. Oh, dude! Freaking working, buddy! Yeah. It's a really cool process. The aerial wire places a positive charge on this can, which then influences the foil ball to deliver electrons from the grounded can, which is directly connected to Earth. Clouds finally opened up, so I connected up the corona motor. Like before, one side was connected to ground, while the other was attached to the aerial wire. And after just a few seconds, hey, she's spinning. It's just remarkable. It never really spun that fast, but I just sat and enjoyed the miracle. I mean, I quite literally was siphoning energy straight from the atmosphere. This motor was operating off of several kilovolts, which you could actually hear if you stopped the motor and brought your finger near the aerial wire. That's the...
So this video actually showed how atmospheric electricity was harnessed. This is exactly what the temples did, but it was way more complex. We will talk about that in a moment. But they even followed a different mathematics system. So this is what is called vortex mathematics. Take a look at it and see the flow of the direction based on the number system. So how do you see this, or how do you interpret this? If you take 1 and just simply double it, doubling is exactly how the universe works in the objective world. Like 1 flower is going to produce 2 flowers, and then 4, and then 8, and 16. So if you if you double 1, it becomes 2. From 2, if you double, it becomes 4. If you double 4, it becomes 8. Now, if you double 8, it becomes 16. So 16 would be 1 plus 6, that's 7. If you double 14, if you double 7, it becomes 14. So 1 plus 4 is 5. Now, if you take 5 and double it, it becomes 10. This is the base 10 mathematical system, but it's not base 10 because it's base 9. And that's why they always said the number 9, or the 9 base, is considered to be God. Now, this shows 2 very important possibilities. The first possibility is it basically shows how the energy movement basically moves from one side to the other side. And it moves between 1, 2, 4, 8, 7 and 5 and back to 1. On the other hand, you can clearly see that it does not touch 6, 3, and 9. This is the system that Tesla talked about as well. The 6 and the 3 points simply just pass the movement, or they just change the direction of the energy. So instead of a Cartesian plane or a Cartesian coordinate of x and y, this system actually is much more harmonious, because it not only has the property of the universe, it has the direction and the flow of the energy. And it shows how yin becomes yang and yang becomes yin. So the point 9 was the all-seeing eye. It's the pivot. It's the point where everything is attached. This is the all-seeing eye, which means it sees everything but takes part in nothing. Now, this is where we come down to what is called toroidal physics. That is, inside a torus, there's a certain mathematics where different event horizons happen. Spiral geometry basically creates different trajectories, like a golden ratio. And what happens is that two opposing forces, they come together and they collapse. This is how the whole thing looks like, which is, if you take one point in the torus and it keeps moving, it creates a perfect golden spiral. Mind it, a golden spiral inside a torus. This is the reason, by the way, this is the reason all the tantric temples were actually built on the model of a torus, because they taught how they could use their DNA energies, which is also a torus, and then bring the different energies together and connect the DNA to the stars. That's how they did it. The next thing that we want to talk about is the vortex energy in a torus from the viewpoint, which is the top view. This is how the whole thing looks like. This is a spiral energy that keeps moving inside, creating the yin and the yang. And as the yin and the yang merge, the central point is where creation happens. This will explain some of these elements, including the Celtic cross as well. And this also explains why the heart, the human heart, or any heart, it basically has a magnetic field, because there is continuous fractalization of these energies. The heart is not just a pump, it actually goes way beyond that. How can one piece of muscle keep beating all throughout our lives? It has to have a quantum infinite aspect. And that is exactly the reason we need to study toroidal physics. And inside the toroid, there is a golden ratio, which means a perfect way of how energy needs to flow. And this is the origin of the alphabets as well. The ancient civilizations understood this entire model, that this is exactly how a rose blossoms. It blossoms from within to outside. So it was always what is within is without, what is above is below. But over here, they realized that the torus field is exactly the grid of the earth. This is the ancient city plan for the city of Prague. The whole plan of the city was built in such a way that it mimics a rose. So again, the ancient civilizations knew every bit of energy dynamics of the cosmos, and they harnessed it again and again and again. From here, we can even find how alphabets, that is the A, B, C, D, E, or the Hebrew alphabet was built. Even the Brahmi script, or even the Kakha, Gagha, all these different letters of our script is also embedded within this torus. So let me give you a quick example. What you have to do is watch the movement of the entire torus field on the right, which is, if you look at it, if you look at the right, it shows a view of the golden ratio within the torus. The way you view it, once you change that view by a certain angle, it basically creates these letters. So now we have a way to even understand how the alphabet was designed, and it was all from the torus. So finally, we have to ask this question, that is, what did they do? They knew something called phase conjugation and fractalization. This is where electromagnetic activity, gravity, and electricity converge with consciousness. And as that happens, one creates a black hole. Now, is this an opinion? Well, I don't know whether this is an opinion or a fact, because we have seen a lot of people doing the research on coherence models, and they have been able to produce 0-point energy. I do not know whether that kind of a research is the same as this, but at least this is the only way they'll be able to lift stones, cut stones, just by using the toroidal energies that flow in the human body. Else, why develop the entire science of Tantra? So if you look at what this basically means, is implosion physics is the physics of love and bliss. Basically, if somebody uses this, the science of implosion, which actually requires a human to do it, now you see how the ancient civilizations use this technology and the human DNA to basically create the black holes, the 0 points, and that's why the building of these temples mimicked the human body. So that brings us to a very important question, and that is, what was the biggest difference between them and us? The biggest difference really is that they were connected, they were pretty egoless, and they had no connection to the mind. So as we come to the near end of the presentation, I want to just tell you that the Shiva Linga is basically nothing but the 0 point, where all vibrations of light, not just visible light, come together into one place. They knew how to collapse the wave and the particle duality as one unified field. And they used Jyotish. And what is Jyotish? Jyotish means the study of light, capital light. So this was the science of astrology, because it was an applied model to use with our DNA to finally collapse this unified field. You can see some of these elements that were discussed by the Egyptians as well. They call the Shiv Linga the Ankh, and this Ankh is repeated in the temples as well. You take a top view of the temple over here, and you'll see that the 4-cube or tesseract geometry is completely on this temple as well. How does the 4 cube or the four-dimensional universe work? It is basically one cube extruding or exploding into 8 cubes and collapsing back again. So they knew exactly how these energies needed to be harnessed, and they kept on doing it. So where does this lead us to? And this is where we start concluding. That is, what is the process of decoding these temples? What can we do with this wisdom? Why use it? Well, there are a couple of models. The first is to understand consciousness and the cosmic intelligence, but also the cosmic physics of it. The second piece they understood, and this is something we have to clearly understand, is the mind and the ego complex, which has made us not even understand who we are. So humans were the DNA, and consciousness is the unseen light that flows. The moment we have the ego complex take over us, the diamond gets cloudy and it doesn't emit the light. We have little idea about what consciousness is. It's a pervading self-awareness that exists in the universe. And if you can see, we only see a small spectrum of this light, a very small spectrum. We know nothing about the rest of light. We also do not see visible light. We only see reflected light. How do we know how the universe showers its light on us? Because the rest of the light cannot be seen. Yet all these energies modify our cerebrospinal fluid, and it creates these different magnetic fields where the heart creates the magnetic field and our veins and arteries basically create the electrical field, which are called the meridians. So finally, I want to conclude with two pieces. It is the mind that creates a lot of problems. The more we understand the challenges of the mind, the better. So as we say that seeing is believing, sometimes that is incorrect. Take a look at this illusion where if you move this piece, it changes color, but it really doesn't change color. It is our perception that changes. And we have seen this to be pretty accurate all the time. So if you look at the illusion, you'll see the mind cannot differentiate between an illusion and the reality. For example, this is not a person running. This is just another illusion. You can clearly see that if I remove the background, there was no shades of gray. If you take a look at this particular picture, you'll see that if you focus on the the black dot, all other moving circles which are purple are now green. This illusion shows the mind problem where the cubes are not moving at all, but our brain and our mind perceives that they are moving. Similarly, if you look at the conditioning that we have, this Coca-Cola piece that you see over here is not colored red at all. It is our brain that fills it in. Both sides are equal, but we cannot differentiate it. Our brain cannot differentiate it. And neither do we, when we look at this picture, can we differentiate that the circles aren't moving. I initially thought of showing another video, but we won't for the lack of time. So we will move to the final pieces.
Everything depends on evolving habits.
This is the most important part, and that is what we understand of reality is really open space. This is not, it's not me saying it. What matters is when these stalwarts say that energy is what matters. There is really no matter. There is only light and sound. The problem with that is all these pieces have been ignored again and again, and we have no harmony inside of us. And you can see that we have forgotten the language of the heart and allowed the mind to take over. We have a lot of intellect with a lot of facts and figures, but really no intelligence. So just to conclude a couple of things over here in the next 10 minutes, I want to explain that we have to find a way to correct things. The way to correct things is to first look at some of the falsities that exist. This is a 1-minute video which shows how to draw a Sri Yantra. We all know that a Sri Yantra is important. And you'll see in the course of the video in like 1 minute, they'll be able to draw the Sri Yantra pretty much perfectly using a ruler and a string. All this is great, but I think we need to ask a couple of questions over here, which is, okay, so someone did draw the Sri Yantra. It's considered to be very auspicious. But what happens after that? What's the application? What changed? Did something change? The sad answer is no. So all this seems to be drawing the Sri Yantras and all that. That is all great. But we don't understand what it does. So finally, what we realized is that we are misaligned. And this misalignment, oops, sorry for that. Oops, I'm not going to show that. The misalignment is that we have a challenge, and the challenge is we don't reach the octave. So for example, we have 7 days in a week, but everything is music. So for example, if you follow the notes, it basically creates what is called an entire wave. So if you go from one sa or do to sa, which is the higher octave, it basically creates an entire wave that spins around itself, which means it's a connected wave. But the moment we use something like this, which is we just go and stop at one note less, then the whole piece breaks. Now this has a huge application in our calendar, which we talked about. If you look at this picture, you'll see that September is actually the 7th month. October is basically octa, so October is the 8th month. November is the 9th month. And Deca is the 10th month. Now, what we want to say is that even our calendar is completely misaligned, because what used to be 10 months now has 12 months, with Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar putting their names and shifting the entire calendaring system. So if you look at the days of the week, that is from Sunday, Monday, etc., starting from Monday to Sunday is 7 days. But what about the 8th day to complete the entire cycle? We don't have that system anymore, which basically resonates with the entire celestial cycle. Imagine that we are in an 8-octave universe in a 7-cycle work week. The problem of the 7 is that if you divide anything by 7, it creates an infinite loop. So people like us, our consciousness would be stuck. So going forward, just want to let you know how the ancients basically aligned themselves to the sun-moon system. So I want to go and finish this presentation by showing a couple of applications that we have been working on. And it's going to take about 5 minutes. I think the biggest wisdom that we can get by studying temples is understanding how to apply them to ancestral behavioral patterns and, of course, astrological patterns as well. So we are going to discuss 3 quick elements of the application because the human species is also a fractal. A fractal means from a mother comes a child, from the child comes another child. So it's the woman or the family unit is basically what we call as a fractal system. If you look at this, I'm going to give you a quick show of a couple of things that we can do. The first thing we need to understand is ourselves. That is, what is our authentic self? The problem is we will never be able to understand what is or who is our authentic self if we do not understand the astrological archetypes. So I do not suggest that you go to an astrologer. You can choose what you want to do, but until one studies the astrological archetypes and the properties that exist in their birth chart, it is going to be very difficult for a person to understand how they are made and what they are made up of. This is kind of our initiative where we are building Astro and AI together to create a decision intelligence platform so we can help people take decisions better. More on this perhaps later, but let's talk about the ancestral pieces and the cycles a little bit. Everything is a fractal, and that is the reason Kal was time, and they have what is called the Buddhists say as the Kal chakra. The family system is basically a kind of a repeating unit that keeps on repeating again and again and again. What we have done is we have taken the astrological patterns of different families and we have mapped it across their 3 generations to find out a very interesting evidence. And the evidence is if we take everybody's astrological patterns and then we map it in the entire family, and this particular example is for an entire business family, we will see that certain archetypes keep on repeating again and again and again. So here's the wife who's the CEO, COO, and the husband is the CEO. They have the exact same pattern. And this is all about their birth charts. We are seeing the exact same energy with the 2 sons. The moment we go to the other people, which is the daughter, for example, we will see the same pattern that keeps repeating as well. What is the chance of 2 generations having the exact same pattern? And this exists in many, many families. But the pattern keeps repeating in the next generation. This is the grandson, and this is the granddaughter. They have the same pattern as well. How is it the same pattern, which is the Saturn-Pluto, keeps moving again and again through the entire family? Because that Saturn-Pluto, that archetype creates abandonment, mortality, risk, feuds, and drama. So we have gone through a lot of these statistical analysis. For example, we can find out love relationships as well. For example, we take a person and the relationships the person has had with multiple people, and if we map it, we will see that there is a pattern that repeats. There is no need to study astrology over here. I'm just saying that once you apply a statistical wisdom like an AI pattern onto these astrological archetypes, it seems the person, whoever woman who he is dating, the same pattern repeats with everyone. And this is one of our biggest discoveries, because not only have we applied this in marriage and other relationships, we have even found out that the same pieces also repeat when it concerns legacy. For example, this is a quick peek of the power structure of a matriarchy in a business family. We will see that the power control dynamics of the mother, the exact same pattern, also repeats with the son. Now the question is, what is the application of this? The application is to help them understand these fractal patterns that exist in many of the business families or any of the large families that have feuds, that have crisis. So ultimately, what matters is to take this wisdom and to bring the self-awareness of these archetypes that repeat, because if they repeat, it just creates a problem with legacy. That is why most businesses lose their entire wealth in 3 generations, but now we can actually find out why. It was never the objective. It was never about the objective wisdom. That is, put more money, put this wealth, get more lawyers, get more this. It was all about the subjective wisdom, where the universe just keeps repeating these ancestral behavioral patterns across generations and generations. The last piece that we want to talk about in the next 3 minutes is that, and this is a absolutely amazing discovery, and that is ancestral behavioral patterns not only repeat in the family, but it repeats in the business as well. Now, let me give a quick example over here. A business, because it has a formation date, it also has the snapshot of all the astrological energies that are flowing through the business. Yes, a business has a subjective energy the moment you register the business. This same family, it's a very large and powerful family in California. They first started their family business in 1985. Then they started 2 other businesses, and you will see the same pattern keeps repeating in any business that they create. Take a look at this 2-minute slide, which is this red piece on the animation shows the sun, and this one shows Chiron. They are opposite to each other. That means the sun is 180 degrees away, or it is 180 degrees to Chiron. Chiron is a wound, and sun is the expression. Now, similarly, you can find out they opened another company in 2003. It has the exact same pattern. So think of this, that doesn't matter what your ancestral behavioral patterns are. Whoever you meet, whatever event happens, whatever business you create, your ancestral pattern is going to keep repeating in the business as well, as if the business is a mirror to build you and not the other way around. Now let's look at the third one, because this second one, the 2003 business, exactly has the same pattern. You see, the sun moves very fast. It moves a degree every day. The chances of the sun being opposite to the Chiron archetype is 1 in 10 million. Now, this doesn't end. This family had a huge mental health issue in 2007, and they opened a nonprofit which actually funds a lot of mental health care. Take a look at this, because the sun and this is Chiron, they square with each other. Imagine the ability to basically bring this wisdom to businesses and business families and solve feuds, solve health crisis, mental health challenges, and all that. All this info can be decoded from ancient temples and it can be put to work. So Kanchan and Chandan as well, I think I'm done with my presentation. I think we'll be able to end this right now.
Thank you so much, Subhashish. So, should we have question answer sessions? My quick question would be what, in summary, what would be the application of this wisdom?
I think there's a lot of applications. And oh, I see
Just a
Melissa.
summary, yeah.
Yeah, no, Melissa is my business partner. She's here. So there are multiple models. Melissa, do you think you'll be able to just speak up for a second, or no? Are you? Or maybe I should. Okay, she's on mute. So here is the wisdom. The applications are in three ways. First is when there is a crisis happening, we need to find out when the crisis is happening and model these astrological patterns. We will exactly know why the crisis exists. So it is a lot of crisis prevention ahead of time can be done within a family and a business. So that's application number one. Application number two is actually understanding the essence of a business. Essence of the business means if you have a business entity, the business entity has a lot of these astrological energies flowing. It is telling us exactly the way how to do the business, but it had from the subjective side. If we know the subjective side of what it tells us about marketing, when the money should come, when the deal should close, it can all be done now. We have done 6 mergers and acquisitions just using this. For example, if a company is trying to fund another company, or if you're looking for funding of a company and you're looking at 10 VCs, we can actually take the birth charts of all the companies and map them to your business and find out which one will find you, because funding has a pattern. The third application is wealth prevention. So if you look at all the family businesses, they are transferring about $40 trillion into the next generation. But they are also passing their ancestral behavioral patterns. If you look at the situation right now, 99% of all family businesses end their entire business, end their entire wealth in 3 generations. There has been no solutions. And I believe what we have discovered can be magic for family business that runs big businesses.
Thank you, Subhashish. Any more question, anybody?
I think it's been a long presentation. So we have 20 minutes overboard, but we can always take questions later. But
yeah, no worries. So thank you, Subhashish, for taking time to come back and present the wonderful session. We enjoyed it very much and we look forward to the next part soon. Thank you, folks, for joining this session. All your encouraging words, all these days, which made it possible to set up part 2 of this topic. Enjoy your rest of the weekend.
Thank you.